The scent of the hospital was the first thing that hit you, a cloying blend of industrial strength antiseptic, bleach, and the faint, sad smell of overbrewed coffee from the nurse's station. It was a perfume I had grown to associate with dread, a scent that clung to my clothes and hair long after I returned home. For 3 long months, this sterile beige room on the third floor of St. Jude's Medical Center had become my second home, the primary stage for my life. I spent every possible moment here, watching my husband, Mark, supposedly fade away. His skin, once a healthy bronze from our weekend hikes in the Blue Ridge Mountains, now possessed a pale, waxy sheen under the relentless hum of the fluorescent lights. The doctors, a rotating cast of specialists with furrowed brows and somber tones, had been maddeningly vague. They spoke in acronyms and possibilities, running an endless battery of expensive tests for a mysterious, aggressive illness that seemed to be systematically draining his energy and, more alarmingly, our life savings. He was always tired, his once booming laugh now reduced to a frail whisper that seemed to physically tug at my heartstrings. I'd quit my part-time job as a research librarian, a job I loved, to become his full-time caregiver. It was a role I accepted without a moment's hesitation. He was my husband, my partner, the man I had stood with before God and our families and vowed to love in sickness and in health. This was the sickness. The in-health part felt like a distant, sun-drenched memory from another lifetime. "How are you feeling today, honey?" I asked, my voice a practiced imitation of cheerful optimism that I no longer felt. I arranged the thin, scratchy blanket over his legs, my fingers brushing against the still muscular calf beneath the fabric. It was one of the many oddities I had subconsciously filed away and refused to examine too closely. Despite this supposed wasting illness, he hadn't lost any significant weight. Dr. Matthews had mumbled something about paradoxical muscle preservation, a rare but not unheard of symptom of certain neurological disorders. I had clung to that explanation, just as I clung to every shred of hope they offered. "Tired, Sarah. Just so tired," he rasped, his eyes fluttering shut in a performance of profound exhaustion. "The treatments are just brutal. I don't know how much more I can take." His voice cracked on the last word, and I felt a familiar pang of anguish. "You're the strongest person I know," I said, my words a familiar mantra we both recited. "We'll get through this, together." I squeezed his hand, and his fingers gave a weak, brief pressure in return. On his bedside table sat a small, cluttered collection of the life he was supposedly clinging to. A glass of lukewarm water, a well-thumbed paperback by his favorite author, a framed photo of us on our wedding day, his face split in a wide, joyous grin, my own beaming with a love so pure it hurt to look at now. Next to the photo was a thick stack of financial documents I'd brought from home for him to sign. We were liquidating our last significant stock portfolio, the one we'd earmarked for a down payment on a bigger house, a house with a yard for the kids we'd dreamed of. This final sum was to cover the astronomical cost of an experimental treatment at a private clinic in Switzerland, a place his specialist had recommended as his last hope. Every signature I witnessed felt like signing away another piece of that dream, but I did it without flinching. His life was worth infinitely more than any house, any dream. I looked at his tired face, the handsome features I had loved for a decade, and felt that powerful, primal surge of protective love. I would do anything, sacrifice anything to see him healthy and smiling again. I just had to believe that the specialists, the staggering bills, the soul-crushing exhaustion, it was all leading somewhere, to a cure, to the day I would get my Mark back. The alternative was a black hole of grief I refused to peer into. I pushed the dark thoughts away and focused on the simple, tangible act of fluffing his pillow, on caring for him, on believing. It was all I had left. The monotonous afternoon routine was broken by the arrival of a young nurse, so new her uniform was still stiff and her movements hesitant. She bustled into the room to check Mark's vitals, her brow furrowed in concentration. I gave her a small, encouraging smile. After 12 weeks, I knew most of the staff by name, their shifts, their kids' sports schedules, the small dramas of their lives shared in hushed tones in the hallway. This one, with her fresh-faced anxiety, was an unfamiliar face. She smiled back nervously, her hands fumbling slightly with the blood pressure cuff. As she turned back toward the mobile cart she'd left in the hallway, her hip caught the corner of Mark's crowded bedside table. The delicate ecosystem of his personal effects was shattered. The glass of water tipped first, a silent wave across the formica surface, before the book, the stack of papers, and the framed photo of our wedding day all tumbled to the linoleum floor with a series of sharp, discordant crashes. The photo frame, a silver one my mother had given us, splintered on impact, sending shards of protective glass skittering under the bed like frightened insects. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry," the nurse cried out, her face flushing a deep, mortified crimson. She immediately bent down, flustered and profusely apologetic. I was already moving from my chair to help her. "It's all right, dear, honestly. Accidents happen." But before I could take another step, a voice, sharp and powerful and utterly unfamiliar, sliced through the air. "Careful! Don't drop my passport!" It wasn't the weak, raspy whisper of a dying man. It was the voice of the old Mark, the Mark who could command a boardroom, the Mark who could umpire a Little League game with unshakable authority. It was commanding, panicked, and shockingly robust. I froze mid-stride, my head snapping toward the bed. He had lunged forward, his upper body propelled by a surge of adrenaline that defied his diagnosis. He was halfway out of the bed, his arm outstretched with desperate urgency, not toward the precious shattered photo of our wedding day, but to a small, dark blue booklet that had skittered to a stop near my feet. His eyes were wide with a raw, animalistic terror that was completely out of proportion to the situation. In that instant, the nurse, the broken glass, the spreading puddle of water, everything else in the room seemed to vanish into a blurry periphery. There was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears and Mark's desperate, panicked gaze fixed on that passport. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, I bent down and picked it up. The glossy cover with its embossed eagle was cool on my skin, but a tremor started in my fingers, a violent, uncontrollable shaking that radiated up my arm and into my chest. A passport. Why in God's name did my terminally ill husband, who claimed he couldn't even walk to the bathroom with my assistance, have his passport within arm's reach in a hospital bed? The question hung in the charged air, heavy and suffocating. I looked from the passport in my trembling hand to my husband's terrified face, and for the first time in 3 agonizing months, the warm blanket of loving concern in my heart was ripped away, exposing a cold, sickening sliver of suspicion. His panic cry hadn't been for our memories. It hadn't been for a treasured keepsake. It had been for his escape route. I drove home in a complete daze, the steering wheel slick in my sweaty palms. The sterile hospital smell still clung to my clothes, a mocking reminder of the lie I now suspected I was living. The deep, official blue of Mark's passport was burned into my retinas. The image of his panic lunge, the sheer, unadulterated vitality in that desperate movement, played on a continuous, torturous loop in my mind, each replay mocking the months of my devoted, selfless care. Back in our quiet, 2-story colonial, the silence was a physical presence. Every object seemed to tell a story of our shared life, a life that now felt like an elaborate stage play where I was the only unwitting actor. The photos on the mantelpiece of us laughing on a beach in Hawaii, of him carrying me across the threshold of this very house 10 years ago, now seemed like relics from a stranger's life, props in a grand deception. The suspicion that had started as a tiny sliver in that hospital room had metastasized during the 20-minute drive, growing into a gnawing, agonizing certainty. Something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. His excuse, when I'd questioned him back in the room, had been flimsy, almost pathetic. "It has my visa information for the Swiss clinic, Sarah. It's just easier to have it all together with my ID," he'd said, his voice conveniently reverting to its feeble whisper as he sank back against the pillows, a sheen of sweat beading on his brow. But the terror in his eyes had told a different, truer story. He wasn't scared of losing his visa information. He was scared of me picking up that booklet. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I lay in our bed, the space beside me feeling vast and cold. At 2 a.m., I finally gave up, slipping out of bed and padding downstairs to our shared home office. The room was neat, organized mostly by me, but his side of the large oak desk was his private domain. I switched on the small green banker's lamp, the soft yellow light illuminating a space that suddenly felt alien and hostile. My heart hammered against my ribs with the force that made me feel lightheaded as I pulled open the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, the drawer where we kept our most important financial records. I had always been willfully ignorant of the details, trusting Mark completely. He was the numbers guy, the meticulous planner. My hands, still not entirely steady, sifted through the neatly labeled folders: household bills, mortgage, retirement fund. Then my fingers brushed against it, a thin manila folder tucked away at the very back, hidden behind everything else, with no label. My breath hitched. I pulled it out and opened the clasp. Inside were pristine, laser-printed bank statements from an institution I'd never heard of, Viridian International Bank. The address was in Georgetown, Grand Cayman, an offshore account. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. Statement after statement detailed a series of large systematic wire transfers. $10,000 here, $25,000 there. I stared at the dates, my mind racing. The dates corresponded perfectly, sickeningly, with the times I had moved money from our joint savings into his personal account for medical expenses. He wasn't paying for treatments. He was methodically siphoning our future, every penny we had painstakingly built together, into a secret account. The final statement, dated just last week, showed a balance that made me feel physically ill. $387,000, our entire nest egg. As I stared at the numbers on the page, a cold, hard fury began to crystallize in my chest, replacing the shock and grief. This wasn't just a secret. It was a calculated, devastating betrayal of the highest order. He hadn't just been lying about being sick. He had been using my love, my care, my very soul as the tools for his grand theft. The bank statements were the skeleton of his betrayal. Now I needed to find the flesh and blood of it. The offshore account was damning, a breathtaking act of financial cruelty, but it didn't fully explain the why. The passport, the secret funds, it all pointed to an elaborate long-term plan. And the plan like that, a plan to erase a life, wasn't something you executed alone. My gaze fell on his sleek silver laptop, sitting closed on the corner of the desk like a silent conspirator. We had always shared everything, or so I had believed. Our lives were an open book, including our passwords. I opened the laptop, the screen glowing to life, and typed in the password we used for all our joint accounts, a combination of our anniversary date and the year we met. Access denied. My blood ran cold. I tried our dog's name, then the name of the street we first lived on. Access denied. Access denied. A profound dread seeped into my bones. He had his own secrets, his own digital life, walled off from me. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the login screen, my mind racing through possibilities. What was important to him? What did he truly value, protect? And then it hit me, a thought so bitter and ironic it tasted like acid in my mouth. I took a shaky breath and typed in a new password, CHLOE 8. Chloe. The name of his so-called college friend who had suddenly re-entered his life about a year ago. A leggy, ambitious realtor with impossibly white teeth who always laughed a little too loudly at his jokes and touched his arm a little too often. The computer unlocked. The screen opened to a generic desktop background of a mountain range, a landscape as empty and fraudulent as my marriage now felt. My heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. For a moment, I just stared. The simple act of being right, confirming my worst fears. With a strange, detached calm, I navigated to his email client. The inbox was mundane, filled with junk mail and work-related messages from his old job. But a quick search for the name Chloe brought up a hidden, password-protected folder. The name of the folder was New Beginnings. I typed her name in again, and it opened. My world didn't just tilt on its axis, it shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. It was all there, a meticulously documented conspiracy against my life, our life. Emails stretched back for months, filled with saccharine terms of endearment, my love, my sweet, and can't wait to be free with you. They discussed their future in Costa Rica with chilling practicality, complete with links to beachfront properties and debates over infinity pools. They mocked my naivete, my devotion. Sarah is handling the final transfers now, one of Mark's emails read, dated only 3 days prior. She believes every word. It's almost too easy. She's so wrapped up in playing the martyr wife, she doesn't see a thing. She'll be devastated, of course, but a clean break is the kindest way in the end. A clean break. The plan was sickeningly, monstrously clear. He would continue the charade of his terminal illness until every last dollar was safely offshore. Then, the doctors at the non-existent Swiss clinic would inform me that he had tragically succumbed to his illness during the experimental procedure. He would be pronounced dead, and while I was drowning in grief, planning a memorial service, he and Chloe would be starting their new life on a tropical beach, funded by the money I had willingly, lovingly given him to save his life. The pain was so sharp, so absolute, it felt like a physical blade twisting in my gut. I wasn't a wife to be cherished. I was an obstacle to be managed, a bank to be emptied, and a fool to be pitied. The next morning, I walked back into that beige hospital room as a different woman. The profound grease and white-hot shock of the previous night had been alchemized in the sleepless hours before dawn, burned away into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. The heartbroken, devoted wife was gone, a ghost of a person I no longer recognized. In her place was an actress, ready to give the performance of a lifetime. Before leaving the house, I had printed copies of everything: the offshore bank statements, the most damning of the emails, the real estate listings in Costa Rica, even a photo of Chloe from her social media page. They were tucked securely in my large purse, a portfolio of my husband's treachery, an indictment waiting to be served. When I entered his room, I forced a smile onto my face, the gesture feeling foreign and tight, like a mask. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, my voice dripping with the same saccharine concern I'd expertly feigned for months. I placed a fresh cup of his favorite dark roast coffee on his bedside table, right next to where the passport had been. "I spoke with the bank this morning. The last of the funds have been successfully transferred. Everything is in place for your trip to Switzerland." He looked up at me, his eyes guarded. The raw panic from the day before was gone, replaced by a veneer of weary relief. He thought he'd gotten away with it, that my discovery of the passport had been a momentary scare, easily explained away. "Thank you, Sarah," he whispered, his voice a perfect imitation of frail gratitude. He reached for my hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You're my rock." His touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin, a violating, repulsive sensation, but I let him hold my hand. I even squeezed back, looking him directly in the eye. "Anything for you, Mark. Anything to get you better." I was playing his game now, by his rules, and I was going to win. I spent the next hour with him, an eternity of chilling intimacy. I talked about logistics for the clinic, asking pointed questions about the treatment protocols he'd described. "Will Dr. Finch be meeting you at the airport? Should I pack you that heavy coat for the evenings in the Alps?" I watched him lie, his eyes shining with false sincerity as he wove intricate, spontaneous tales about the world-renowned Dr. Alistair Finch and the revolutionary gene therapy that was our last desperate hope. He was a masterful performer, his voice filled with the convincing tremor of hope, his eyes welling up with crocodile tears as he spoke of his fear and his overwhelming gratitude for my sacrifice. Every word he spoke was another nail in his own coffin. I let him talk, let him spin his web of lies, let him dig his hole deeper and deeper. I was no longer the gullible, loving wife. I was a silent predator, observing my prey, taking meticulous notes, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He thought he was in control, that his grand deception was nearing its triumphant, profitable conclusion. He had no idea that the curtain was about to rise on a whole new act, one I had written and directed myself, an act where he was not the hero of his own story, but the irredeemable villain in mine. The anticipation was a cold, thrilling current in my veins. He was going to pay for what he had done, not just to me, but to the memory of the life I thought we had built. The only question left was how to make the fallout as public, as humiliating, and as devastating as humanly possible. The perfect stage for my final act presented itself just 2 days later. Mark's parents, Eleanor and George, were scheduled to drive in from Ohio for a final visit before his departure for Switzerland. They were good, honest people, a kind, salt-of-the-earth couple who believed in God, hard work, and the inherent goodness of their only son. They adored Mark and had always treated me like the daughter they'd never had. They had been beside themselves with worry, calling me every single day for updates, their voices thick with anguish. They'd even offered to take out a second mortgage on their small home to help with the costs, an offer I had tearfully refused, knowing now it would have gone straight to his Costa Rican slush fund. Their impending visit was the audience I needed. They deserved to know the truth. They deserved to see their son for who he truly was, not the sainted victim he pretended to be. I called them that morning, carefully modulating my voice to sound strained and filled with convincingly feigned emotion. "I think you should come," I'd said, a lump of genuine sorrow for them in my throat. "March is feeling very reflective. I think seeing you both would mean the world to him before he leaves, to say his goodbyes, just in case." The manipulation felt dirty, but necessary. They arrived in the early afternoon, their faces etched with the deep lines of whirly and sleepless nights. Eleanora, a small, bird-like woman with kind eyes, pulled me into a tight hug, her small frame shaking with emotion. "Oh, Sarah, you are a saint, a true living saint for what you are doing for our boy. We pray for you every night." George, a tall, quiet man of few words, simply gripped my shoulder, his gaze watery and filled with a profound, fatherly gratitude. The praise felt like ash in my mouth. I led them into the room where Mark was already in character, looking wan and artfully frail against the stark white pillows. He put on a brave, heart-wrenching face for them, speaking of his upcoming journey with a masterful blend of fear and resolute hope. I let the grotesque scene play out for a full 30 minutes. I stood by the window, a silent observer, as I listened to him lie to the faces of the two people who had given him life and endless, unconditional love. He told them how much he loved them, how their strength inspired him, how he was fighting so hard to come back to them, to me. My heart ached for Eleanor and George, for the brutal pain I was about to inflict upon them, but it was a necessary surgical cruelty. The cancer of his lies had to be cut out, no matter how much it hurt. Finally, after he finished a particularly moving monologue about his childhood memories, I chose my moment. I waited for the poignant silence to settle. Then I cleared my throat, a small, sharp sound that made all three of them turn to look at me. "Mark," I began, my voice soft but carrying a new, clear authority that cut through the somber atmosphere. "Before you go, there's just one last piece of business. Since your parents are here and they've been so supportive, I think it's important we're all on the same page about our finances. This treatment has, as you both know, taken absolutely everything." Mark stiffened, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "Sarah, I don't think we need to bore my parents with the dry details. Oh, but I insist. They should know the full extent of our shared sacrifice. We've sold our home, we've emptied our 401ks, all for this clinic in Switzerland." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in, then turned my gaze back to my husband, a predator cornering its prey. "Tell them, Mark. Tell them about the wonderful Dr. Finch. Tell them all about the revolutionary gene therapy. Tell them how this is all going to save your life." The trap was set. The room was utterly silent, charged with a new, uncomfortable, and explosive tension. His moment of judgment was at hand. Mark's eyes darted between me and his parents, a cornered animal's frantic search for an escape route. He saw the shift in my tone, the unyielding hardness in my expression, but he couldn't possibly comprehend the depth of the abyss he was about to fall into. He chose to bluff, to double down on the role he had perfected over months. "Sarah is right," he said, his voice taking on a noble, martyred quality for his parents' benefit. "She has sacrificed everything for me. She is my angel." He looked at his mother. "This clinic, it's our only hope. Dr. Finch is a pioneer in his field. Is he?" I interrupted, my voice dangerously calm and laced with ice. "That's funny, because when I took the liberty of calling the Swiss Medical Board yesterday, they had never heard of a Dr. Alistair Finch. They'd also never heard of his Zurich Regenerative Institute. In fact, they confirmed no such clinic exists." The color drained from Mark's face, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of shock. Eleanor and George looked between us, their expressions a painful mosaic of confusion and dawning horror. "Sarah, what on earth are you talking about?" Eleanor asked, her voice a frightened tremble. I didn't answer her. I kept my eyes locked on Mark, pinning him to the bed with my gaze. "But you do have a plan for a new life, don't you, Mark? It just doesn't involve any of us. And it's not in the Swiss Alps, is it?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the thick stack of papers. With the flick of my wrist, I let them fall onto the thin hospital blanket covering his legs. They scattered like dead leaves. "This is our treatment, Eleanor," I said, my voice rising. "These are statements for an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Nearly $400,000, our entire life savings, our home, our future." Mark stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice losing all its feigned weakness, replaced by a desperate, panicked rasp. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said,
my voice now ringing with righteous, unrestrained fury. I held up another printout, the email header clearly visible. Is this a misunderstanding too? An email to your mistress Chloe? The one where you meticulously plan your new beginnings in Costa Rica? The one where you talk about how easy it was to fool your gullible, loving wife? I started to read aloud, my voice clear and strong, each word a hammer blow in the silent room. She'll be devastated, of course, but a clean break is the kindest way. We'll be on the beach sipping margaritas while she's planning my funeral. Is that kind, Mark? Is it? George, a man I'd never seen raise his voice, surged to his feet, his face a mask of purple, apoplectic rage. Mark, is this true? He roared, his voice cracking with disbelief and fury. Mark was speechless, his jaw working but no sounds coming out. His elaborate, monstrous fiction had been torn to absolute shreds in a matter of seconds. He was exposed, no longer the tragic patient, but a conniving, pathetic thief. Eleanor collapsed back into her chair and began to sob, a deep, ragged animal sound of a mother's heart being shattered. I dropped the final piece of evidence onto the pile, a glossy printout of the beachfront property he and Chloe were planning to buy with my life's savings. You weren't dying, Mark. You were just waiting for me to finish mourning you. With that, I turned my back on him, on the wreckage of our marriage, and walked toward his sobbing mother, leaving him utterly alone to face the judgment of the family he had so casually, cruelly planned.
3 months later, the refreshing scent of sage green paint and lemon oil had finally replaced the phantom smell of antiseptic that had haunted the halls of my house for so long. The hour in that sentence was now officially, legally, and spiritually mine. The divorce had been swift and mercilessly efficient. Faced with an irrefutable mountain of evidence of fraud, and confronted with the combined volcanic fury of his family and mine, Mark had no leverage, no defense. He signed everything over without a fight. His parents, George and Eleanor, steeped in a deep, abiding shame and heartbreak, had acted with the integrity their son so profoundly lacked. They hired their own lawyer to work with mine, ensuring I received every single penny he had stolen. They liquidated their own retirement funds and sold a small rental property to make me completely whole, a gesture of honor that left me in tears. In a final painful letter, they informed me they had disowned their only son. The fallout didn't end there. My lawyer had forwarded my evidence to the district attorney's office. A federal investigation into wire fraud and other financial crimes was well underway. Mark had traded his fake terminal illness for a very real and likely very long prison sentence. As for Chloe, she had vanished the moment the scandal broke, deleting her social media and disappearing from the real estate world like a ghost who had never really existed outside of a secret email account. I stood in the center of my newly painted living room, holding a cardboard box filled with the last of Mark's stains. A few old college sweatshirts, a worn tennis racket, a handful of books I couldn't bring myself to throw away, but couldn't bear to look at. I taped the box shut and wrote George and Eleanor on the top in black marker. They had quietly asked for a few mementos of the son they thought they had raised, and this was a kindness I could afford them. The house felt lighter, brighter, as if it could finally breathe again. I had purged every trace of him. The heavy, dark furniture we'd bought together was gone, replaced with pieces that were lighter, more modern. The photos of us were gone, replaced with vibrant pictures of my friends, my sister, my scruffy terrier, Rusty. The walls were covered in art that I loved. My phone buzzed on the new court's kitchen counter. It was a text from my lawyer, a woman who had become a fierce ally. The funds from the Cayman account have been successfully seized by federal authorities and are being wired to your new accounts. It's over, Sarah. You won. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. It was truly, finally over. I walked to the large picture window in the living room and looked out at the quiet, sun-dappled street. The world outside was the same, but I was irrevocably different. The ordeal had hollowed me out, yes, but it had also filled me with a steely strength I never knew I possessed.
I had been a victim. I had been a fool who loved blindly and trusted completely, but I had not been defeated. I listened to that tiny sliver of suspicion, uncovered the horrific truth, fought for my life, and reclaimed my future. The betrayal had left a deep scar on my heart, but I knew, with the certainty that settled deep in my soul, that it would heal. It was no longer an open wound, but a testament to my survival. I had survived. I had triumphed. And for the first time in a very long time, as the warm afternoon sun streamed into my clean, quiet, peaceful house, I felt a sense of profound and absolute peace. I was free. And I was finally ready for my own new beginning.